Okay, here's my problem. I turned the key on. Gas gauge or fuel gauge says empty. We've got voltage. Of course, we're not moving. Oil pressure gauge works, and the new mixture sensor for the engine also works. But the problem for today, let's find out why the gas gauge doesn't work, because I happen to know the tank is full. Got a gas gauge that doesn't work. First thing I was going to do was check the ground. And so if you take a look at the meter here, I'm zeroing the meter, and the meter basically has at 0.1 ohms is a direct short. Okay, so I'm gonna go from a stainless steel bolt on the engine, and I'm gonna touch the tank. 1.2 ohms. Okay, so now I'm gonna touch the ground wire on the sender. $518 ohms. That doesn't seem good. Not at all. I'm gonna have to dig into this thing and see why I've got high resistance. I mean, there's only two wires, plus 12, which is the red wire. Let's see. Let me, since I'm here, let me turn on the key. Okay, so I got the key turned on. We should have 12 volts to the sender. Okay, here's on the fuel gauge, right here is the black wire. I'm going to go there, and I'm going to go to the red wire on the ignition switch. I've got 12.39 volts. I've got the key on, so I'm going to go here to the purple wire, which is the switch 12 volts. If you notice, the purple wire here goes everywhere. I'm going to check, and I've got 12.22 volts. So I have voltage going to the sender. However, on the sender, I've got 2.2 volts, which is the same thing I got back at the gauge. I don't know if that's good or bad. I think I will need to, I'll need to check. Let me get back to you here. I need break time here. Got my soda from the clown. Taking a break in the truck, and I thought I'd do one of the emails here. I got email from Josh in Illinois. Josh says, watch your channel all the time. Wonder if you knew anything about horses. Well, it's rather interesting. I used to live when I was a kid back in the day, I used to live in Jefferson City, Missouri, and I would ride a racehorse by the name of Hack's Alibi on the weekends. So I know a little bit about horses. Anyway, back to Josh's letter. It said, I've got a horse. His name is Buddy, and I think he's depressed. What do you think I should do? Well, the first thing I can think of is go up there, look him in the eye, and say, hey, big guy, why the long face, and see if he opens up to you. That's all I can suggest, Josh. Thanks for writing. Okay, I tracked down the nature of my problem. If I've got a weather pack connector, here's one end, and if you can see, there is a round pin in there, and here is the other end. Let me see here. Hello. I don't know. You probably can't see in there, but the pin is supposed to put pressure against the ferrule, and one of the pins is collapsed inside. I've taken it apart. What I need to do is take the removal tool and take this off on the basically take the pin out and replace the pin. This is the lead that goes to the S terminal, which is right here. Let's move the black wire. S terminal, which is the sender, and it goes to, this is so I can unplug the dash. So I've got to sit and fix this problem. Now I wanted to go over how the gas gauge in the boat is wired, and I'll talk about my troubleshooting approach. Basically, what we've got is we've got the fuel gauge here, also known as the gas gauge. In the back of the gas gauge, you'll find 4 connections, plus 12, ground or common. I call it black wire common, which is the common ground throughout the boat. There's a connection for a light after dark, and then something called S, which is the sender. Now what you'll find is plus 12 comes in from the battery, goes to your key switch, and this is almost always a red wire. I believe there's a Coast Guard coloring scheme for doing this. After here, when you switch the 12 volts on, it goes to a violet wire, which is switch 12 volt, come down to the gauge. Now, this ground on the gauge doesn't, as far as the fuel is concerned, doesn't do anything. It's mainly for this light after dark, where you can take, you turn on the light, it needs a ground to power the light. So the circuit here comes down through here, goes through the plus 12, goes through the gauge, which is basically kind of a ohm meter that's been calibrated between empty and full based on your tank. I believe this is, I'm going to say this from memory, 80 to 240 ohms. So it's basically like an ohm meter. So this 12 goes through the gauge, goes to the sender, comes down here, or to that's the S. The S is the sender connection. Comes down through the boat and comes down to the sender on the gas tank. There is a plus and a minus. The plus, it goes through a resistor or something similar. Now keep in mind, there are some senders that have no moving parts. They're electronic, and they have to do with a float rising up and down on a rod. But it's the same thing. It changes the resistance between this point and this point. So what you've got is coming through here, going through the gauge, coming through here, going through the sender, and it goes to the common connection, basically the black wire common for the boat. Now, I'd like to point out that this goes back, my first troubleshooting was to look at the this ground from here to here,
and I wanted to make sure that this point was grounded to the tank and that the tank was grounded to the engine block, because the engine block is grounded. I'm going to say grounded, but the ground on a boat happens to be the negative on the battery. So I checked this out and found out that I had about a ohm and a half, something like that, of resistance, and I could get a connection from here to the fuel tank and from here to the engine block. So I basically didn't have a ground problem. I next went to here and I was looking for voltage. I found about 2 volts. I thought it was low, but the fuel tank was full. So this means normally the resistance, I'm going to say this from memory, the resistance is closer to being to 0 than to 240 ohms with a full tank. Okay, so this could be, between here and ground, could be a good voltage reading. So I went back to here and I was checking. I checked to ground and I went to other grounds within the instrument panel, and I did have a good ground here, which of course only means that the light's going to light. Then I went back to I tested between this point and the red wire. Oh, we got kitty cat howling. Between this point on the gauge to the red wire, that'd be this wire unswitched, and I got over 12 volts. I turned the switch on. I went to the violet wire. I had a little bit, there's resistance in the contacts of the switch, but I had 12 volts going to here. Now the interesting thing, while I was playing with this, the gauge came and started to work. Now it turns out, in my case, I have a weather pack connector in here that allows me to remove the instrument panel of the boat. And as I showed you earlier, that has a bad pin, and the next thing, it basically comes from the sender, goes to a weather pack connector, so I can unplug this and take all the instruments out, without pulling wires and everything. So this has a bad pin, and what I'll do is I'll show you how I repair a weather pack connector. But that's the basic wiring on a fuel gauge. Well, I put a new pin on this. Excuse me. Basically, I was unable to find my crimper for these pins. This is what the pin looks like. These 2 little prongs on the side hold it inside this connector, and of course here is the seal. So basically what I did is I tinned the tip of the wire with solder, and then I took a pair of needle nose and bent these over and then heated it up with the soldering iron until it got a little warm. Correct way is to use the crimper that bends these over correctly. But I went to all the local auto parts store. They don't carry them. Any of them don't carry the weather pack crimpers or the removal tool. I basically used this removal tool, and what I did is I reached inside and I pushed these pins back while pulling on this, and I finally got it out using this little probe tool. Hope I don't stab myself. There we go. So now the idea is to take and put this back in the connector. Okay, so I push this back in. You can see the pin right there, and then you take and you close this little connector, and you've got a waterproof connection. That's it. Now we just put it back on the S part of the gauge and plug it back in, and the fuel gauge should work. Okay, got the new pin in. There we go. Snap together, and it goes back on the S position on the gauge. Okay, what did I do? There it is. This one I did with the nut. Now, before we put it all back in, let's test it out. It's on full. Okay, just gonna tighten everything else up. Yep, works, it works. All I gotta do now is put the screws back in the console, in the dash. Yep, gas gauge works. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. And thanks for watching.